I sat on the back porch of my new house with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the sun come up over the ridge, and I thought, this is it. This is what 63 years of living gets you if you're stubborn enough to survive the worst of it. The house was more than I ever needed. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen big enough to actually move around in. I'd bought it cash, which still felt unreal to say out loud. Paid cash for a house on 11 acres in western Tennessee. And I didn't know a single person on this earth 1 red cent for any of it. My name is not important. What matters is that 12 years ago, I was sleeping on a cot in the back of my own shop because my son's wife had convinced him I was toxic, unstable, and a danger to their family. Those were her words. Toxic, unstable. I know, because my son read them to me over the phone in a voice so flat and rehearsed it didn't even sound like him anymore. He said they needed space. He said I needed to respect their boundaries. He said if I couldn't do that, then there was nothing more to discuss. I tried to say something. He hung up. That was a Tuesday in November. I remember because the heat had gone out in the shop and I was trying to fix it when he called, and after I put the phone down, I just stood there with a wrench in my hand for a long time, not moving. I had a granddaughter. She was 4 years old. I'd held her the day she came home from the hospital. I had built her a little wooden step stool with her name painted on it so she could reach the bathroom sink. Her name was painted in yellow because that was her favorite color. After that phone call, I never saw her again. Not for a long time. My shop was a furniture repair and restoration business I'd been running since I was 31. Nothing fancy. I fixed antiques, refinished hardwood, did custom woodwork for people who wanted something built right. I was good at it. Not rich from it, but good at it. My wife had passed 6 years before that phone call. Cancer. After she was gone, I threw myself into the work because there wasn't anything else to do with the grief. And I think that's what his wife resented. She wanted holidays. She wanted us all together doing what she called making memories, which mostly meant doing things her way on her schedule. I was always in the shop. I missed a birthday dinner once because I had a deadline on a restoration job for a museum up in Nashville. Once. She never forgave me for it. I don't know exactly when she started working on my son. I just know that the man who called me that Tuesday didn't sound like the boy I raised. He used to call me Pops. That day he called me by my first name. So I let them go. Not easily. I wrote letters that came back unopened. I left voicemails that went unanswered. After 8 months of that, I stopped. I had my dignity, even if I didn't have much else. What I did have was the shop, and a stubbornness that my wife used to call my worst quality and my best one, depending on the day. I kept working. I kept refining what I knew. I started taking on bigger jobs, estate pieces, insurance restorations, work that required real skill and real patience. A man I'd done some work for introduced me to an auction house in Memphis, and that connection opened a door I hadn't expected. They needed someone who could authenticate and restore pieces before major sales. I became that person. Over the next 4 years, I built something I hadn't planned to build. I brought on 2 apprentices. I moved into a larger facility. I started buying distressed estate lots at auction, restoring them, and reselling through the auction house at multiples of what I paid. It wasn't glamorous work. I smelled like linseed oil and wood stain most days. But the money started accumulating in a way it never had before. By year 7, I had a legitimate business worth more than I ever imagined owning. I incorporated. I hired a real accountant, not just a tax guy. I bought the building I'd been renting for years, then bought the one next to it. I didn't talk about any of this publicly. I wasn't on social media. I didn't go to the kind of places where I'd run into people who knew my son. I just worked and saved and built, and tried not to think too hard about the granddaughter growing up somewhere who probably didn't know my name. Year 9, I made a decision that changed everything. The auction house made me an offer to buy a 49% stake in my operation. I negotiated hard, harder than they expected from a man in worn-out boots who looked like he'd rather be sanding something than sitting in the conference room. We settled on terms that gave them their stake and gave me enough liquidity to invest in a commercial real estate opportunity a colleague had flagged. That investment tripled in 3 years. Year 12, I sold the business. Not the knowledge, not the relationships, not the reputation I'd built, just the business entity and the facility. I walked away with more money than my father made in his entire life, multiplied by a number I won't say out loud because it still feels like I'll jinx it. I bought the house in Tennessee. I started sleeping more than 5 hours a night for the first time in a decade. I planted a garden. I built furniture again, just for myself, just because I liked doing it. I was, for the first time in a long time, at peace. And then my son called. I didn't recognize the number at first. He was using a different phone. I found out later his wife had made him get a new one. Some whole complicated reason I still don't fully understand. He called 3 times before I picked up. Something made me answer that third time. Maybe I was just tired of wondering. "Dad," he said. Just that. Just the word. I sat down slowly in the chair by the window. Outside, a mockingbird was going at it in the oak tree, running through its whole repertoire. I listened to it for a second before I said anything. "It's been a while," I said. He started crying almost immediately. Not loud, just this quiet, ragged sound like something breaking slowly. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been sorry for years. He said his wife had told him things about me that weren't true, and he believed her because he was young, and she was persuasive, and he'd been a fool. He said he wanted to make it right if I'd let him. I listened to all of it without saying much. When he was done, I asked about my granddaughter. Her name was Lily. Wait, no. Her name was Nora. She was 16 now. He said she was smart, that she'd been asking about me lately, that she'd found an old photograph of the two of us together when she was a baby and wanted to know who I was. Something happened in my chest when he said that, something I wasn't prepared for. I told him I needed to think. I told him not to call again until I reached out first. He agreed without any argument, which told me something had changed in him. The old version, the one his wife had shaped, would have pushed back. This one just said okay. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked it through with my neighbor, a retired judge named Clifford who had seen enough of human nature to offer an opinion without flinching. He said, "You can forgive someone and still keep your eyes open. Those aren't contradictory things." I called my son back. I told him he could bring Nora to meet me. Just the two of them. No overnight stay, just a visit. He said yes immediately. The visit went better than I expected and worse than I hoped, which is probably the honest description of most things involving family. Nora was extraordinary. Sharp and funny and a little guarded in the way teenagers are when they're trying to decide if an adult is worth trusting. She looked at my workshop with the kind of focused interest that reminded me of myself at her age. She picked up a hand plane I'd left on the bench and held it correctly without being shown. I noticed that. My son was different. Quieter. Smaller somehow than I remembered. Apologized twice more over the course of the afternoon. I accepted it both times without making him feel worse about it than he already did. His wife hadn't come. He said she was giving us space, and I didn't push on it. They left at dusk. Nora hugged me on the porch, quick, a little stiff, the hug of someone who isn't sure yet if the gesture is welcome but does it anyway. I told her she was welcome back any time. 2 months later, everything blew up. My son called on a Friday evening. Voice different than the apologetic tone I'd been hearing. Tighter. His wife had been on him, apparently. She'd found out he'd visited me, she hadn't known, which told me something. And she had, in her words, a lot of questions about the visit and about my financial situation. He stumbled over the words in a way that told me he was embarrassed to be relaying them. Then he said it. She wanted to know if they could move in with me for a while. The house was big, he said. There was room. It would only be temporary. I was quiet for a moment. I said, "She doesn't know you came to see me." He said, "No." I said, "And now that she's found out," her first response was to ask about moving in. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I told him I would think about it and call him back. I did not call him back that weekend. On Monday morning, I drove into town and sat with my attorney for 2 hours going over some things I wanted in order. Not because I expected anything dramatic to happen, but because I'd lived long enough to know that clarity on paper prevents a lot of grief later. On Tuesday, they showed up at my house without calling. I was in the workshop when I heard tires on the gravel. I came around the side of the house, wiping sawdust off my hands, and saw my son's car in the drive. And next to it, a truck I didn't recognize, loaded up with boxes and furniture wrapped in moving blankets. My daughter-in-law got out first. She had the walk of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. She had on a bright blazer, heels on gravel, which struck me as theatrical. She smiled at me the way you smile at a bureaucrat you need something from. "We thought it would be easier to just come," she said, "rather than all the back and forth." My son got out after her. He didn't meet my eyes right away. Nora was in the back seat. She didn't get out at first. When she did, she looked at the ground. I took a breath. I looked at the truck. I looked at the truck. I looked at my daughter-in-law. I said, "You're going to want to put that back." She laughed a little. She said there was plenty of room. She said family takes care of family. She said Nora could have her own space and finish her last 2 years of school nearby, which would be so good for her. She talked for a solid minute, moving toward the porch as she talked, as if walking toward the door was the same as being invited through it. I stepped to the side so that I was between her and the porch steps. I said, "I didn't say you could move in." She stopped. The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted. She said my son had told her I was open to discussing it. I looked at my son. He looked at the gravel. I said, "I told him I'd think about it." I didn't say yes. Nobody called me. Nobody asked. You just showed up with the truck. She pivoted fast. She said they were family. She said I had all this space and it was almost selfish to rattle around in it alone. She said Nora needed stability. Said it with emphasis, the way people say things they know will land. She was not wrong that the word Nora would affect me. She was counting on it. I looked at Nora. Nora was looking at me, not at the ground anymore, looking at me with an expression I read as, I had no idea this was the plan. That told me what I needed to know. I said, "Nora is welcome here anytime she wants to visit. That offer stands." I looked at my daughter-in-law. "The two of you are not moving into my home." My daughter-in-law's composure cracked, just slightly at the edges. She said I was being cold. She said my son had come to me in good faith to repair the relationship. She said that after 12 years of silence, the least I could do was, "Stop," I said. She stopped. I said, "You ended that 12 years of silence, not me. I wrote letters that came back unopened. I called for 8 months before I gave up. You closed that door, not me. My son came to find me when he was ready, and I received him. That's on my record, not yours. But showing up at my house without permission with a moving truck is not repairing a relationship. That's attempting to occupy someone's life without asking." My son finally looked up. His face was complicated. My daughter-in-law said I was being dramatic. I said, "You have until I finish my coffee to get that truck turned around. I'm going to go make a cup." I went inside. I made a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly, watching the clock. I wasn't entirely calm. My hands were not entirely steady. But I stayed at the table. At the 19-minute mark, I heard the truck start. I went back outside. The truck was backing out of the drive. My daughter-in-law was already inside her car. My son was standing at the hood of his, keys in hand, looking at me. Nora was still standing in the yard. I walked over to her. She looked like she'd been crying or close to it. She said, "I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know that was the plan." I said, "I know." She said she told me we were coming to visit. I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her that the offer stood. She was welcome here. She could call me any time. She could come on a weekend, and I'd teach her to use a hand plane properly if she was interested. She almost smiled. My son was watching us from the car. When Nora walked back, he looked at me over the roof of the car for a moment. I gave him a nod. Not forgiveness, not exactly. Just acknowledgement. He got in. They drove out. I stood in the driveway for a while after the dust settled. The mockingbird was back in the oak tree. What happened after that happened slowly, the way important things usually do. My daughter-in-law apparently did not take the situation quietly. She told people, mutual acquaintances, my son's extended family, anyone in range, that I had refused to help my own family, that I'd turned them away, that I was bitter and vindictive and withholding. She built quite a story around it. I heard some of it secondhand. I didn't respond to any of it. I'd learned something over those 12 years of quiet. That silence, used correctly, is not weakness. It's a long game. What I did do was call my attorney and make some changes to my estate documents. Not changes born from anger, but changes born from clarity. Nora was named as a primary beneficiary, with conditions that protected her interests and hers alone. Structures were put in place that could not be redirected or leveraged by anyone else. About 4 months after the driveway incident, my son called me again. This time he was alone, calling from a parking lot somewhere, voice low. He said things were not good at home. He said he'd been thinking about a lot of things. He asked if we could talk. We talked for an hour and a half. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with my son since his mother was alive. He didn't make excuses. He said he'd let himself be shaped into someone he didn't recognize, and he was trying to find his way back. He asked for nothing. He didn't bring up money, or the house, or any of it. At the end, I asked him what he needed. He said, "I don't know yet. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to make her happy." I said I understood that better than he knew. Nora visited 3 times over the following months. She came by herself the second and third times, with her father's knowledge, and, eventually, her mother's reluctant awareness. She was teaching herself to drive and liked coming out on weekends when the roads were quiet. She got decent with the hand plane. Better than decent. She had the patience for it, which not everyone does. On her 3rd visit, she asked me if I was lonely. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I told her there was a difference between lonely and alone. I told her I'd spent years being lonely in rooms full of people, and that what I had now, the quiet, the work, the land, the slow accumulation of things that mattered, didn't feel lonely to me. It felt like the life I'd actually been working toward, even when I didn't know it. She said, "That makes sense." Then she went back to what she was saying. She's applied to 3 colleges. She told me about it over the phone, each one with the particular tension in her voice of someone who wants something badly and is afraid to say so. I told her I would help with tuition wherever she landed. She was quiet for a moment after I said that. Then she said, "You don't have to." I said, "I know. That's why I want to. I don't know what's going to happen with my son. I don't know if he'll find his way to the version of himself I believe is still in there. I don't know what will happen with his marriage, and it's not my business to predict it. What I know is that the door is not locked. He knows where I am. My daughter-in-law has not attempted contact since the driveway. I don't expect she will. The thing she was after, access to what I'd built, is no longer accessible to her. There's no angle left to work. People like that don't persist once the angle is gone. I finished building a rocking chair last week. Took me about 3 weeks, working in the evenings, using some white oak I'd been saving for the right project. It's on the back porch now, faces east, catches the morning light just right. Sometimes I sit in it with coffee going cold in my hand, watching the sun come up over the ridge. And I think about all the versions of my life that didn't happen. The letters that came back. The phone that stopped ringing when I gave up calling. The 4-year-old girl with the yellow step stool. And then I think about a 16-year-old who picked up a hand plane she'd never touched before and held it exactly right. That's enough. More than enough. I sold the business, I kept the knowledge, and I kept what actually mattered. I've thought a lot about what actually happened over those 12 years. Not the drama of it, the driveway, the moving truck, the blazer on gravel, but the quieter thing underneath all of it. The mechanism. Here's what I believe. For whatever it's worth, coming from a man who smells like linseed oil most days, what you do in the dark when nobody is watching and there's no audience and no reward in sight is the thing that builds you or hollows you out. That's it. That's the whole equation. When my son stopped calling, I had a choice. I could have spent those years in resentment, replaying the phone call, rewriting the argument, nurturing the wound. A lot of people do that. I understand why. It feels like holding on to something. But what you're actually holding on to is a version of yourself that is defined entirely by what was done to you. And that version of you cannot build anything. It can only react. I chose the shop instead, not out of wisdom. I wasn't wise. I was just stubborn. And I needed somewhere to put the energy. But that stubbornness, aimed at something real, became something I didn't expect. It became a business. It became a life I actually wanted to be living, not because I planned it that way, but because the work was honest and the effort was consistent and eventually honest. Consistent effort compounds the same way debt does, just in the opposite direction. My daughter-in-law spent 12 years building something too. She built a version of my son that suited her purposes, and she built a strategy around what she thought my weakness was. She thought I needed family badly enough to accept any terms to get it back. She wasn't entirely wrong about the need. She was completely wrong about how far I'd compromised to satisfy it. What she didn't account for was 12 years of learning the difference between what I wanted and what I was willing to accept. That's a distinction that only gets clear through time and through loss. You cannot shortcut it. You cannot perform your way to it. Nora is the part of this I didn't plan for and couldn't have manufactured. She picked up that hand plane and held it right. And something in me recognized a quality I hadn't seen in a long time. Patience without resignation. Curiosity without performance. She didn't know what she was showing me. That's what made it real. I think about the step stool I built her when she was 4. Yellow letters. I wonder if it's still somewhere. I'll ask her one day, when it feels like the right moment. The last thing I want to say is this: integrity is not a feeling. It's not something you have when things are going well or when the people around you are behaving. It's what you do when the truck is in your driveway and someone is telling you that your own home is being occupied, whether you like it or not. Integrity is the ability to say no clearly, without cruelty and without apology, and then go inside and make a cup of coffee and let the decision stand. I'm not a hard man. I don't think of myself that way. But I am a man who learned the slow and expensive way that softness in the right moments is a gift and softness in the wrong moments is a trap. Knowing the difference is the whole work of a life. The rocking chair is on the back porch. The coffee goes cold most mornings. The mockingbird is still out there in the oak tree. I have no complaints.